I was in the middle of a work trip that felt like it would never end. The empty roads, the radio cutting out with every turn, and the darkening sky were starting to weigh on my mind. It was past midnight when my eyes began to feel heavy, and I knew that if I didn't find a place to stop soon, I was going to fall asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw the flickering neon sign in the distance. Motel vacancy. It wasn't exactly inviting. That light flashing in the middle of nowhere, with a poorly lit reception area and the parking lot practically empty, gave me a bad feeling right off the bat. But I was too tired to care. The thought of sleeping in my car seemed even worse. So, I pulled into the parking lot and parked near the reception. The place smelled musty as soon as I walked in. The walls had dark stains of moisture, the wallpaper was peeling, and the silence there was strange. Even for that hour, everything felt dead. I expected, to hear a TV on, footsteps from other guests, but nothing. Just the sound of the fans slowly spinning on the ceiling and the ticking of an old clock behind the reception. The woman behind the counter looked as worn out as the motel. She barely acknowledged me when I entered, just looked at me with a vacant stare and asked, "Need a room?" As if she already knew the answer. "Yes, please," I replied, feeling the exhaustion in my voice. She handed me a key without even checking who I was or properly taking my details. She just pointed to the end of the hallway and said, "Room 12. At the end, she didn't ask how long I'd be staying or mention breakfast or anything else a normal hotel would say. It felt like she just wanted to get back to doing nothing. I walked down the narrow corridor towards my room. The ceiling lights flickered from time to time, as if they were about to go out any moment. The doors to the other rooms were all closed, and the hallway smelled like a mix of cleaning products and something else. Something sour, like spoiled food. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. It was as if I was the only person in that place, and that already bothered me a little. Nobody checks into a motel this late without making some noise, right? By the time I reached the door of room 12, I was almost regretting stopping there. But my body was pleading for rest, and I knew I wouldn't be able to drive another 5 minutes. I opened the door and was greeted by a stifling smell, almost suffocating, as if the room hadn't been aired out in weeks. The carpet was old, with dark stains scattered across it, and the bed looked like it had seen better days, with the mattress sagging in the middle. I tried to ignore it. I closed the door, locking it tight, and took a quick look around the room. The window was covered by a thick curtain, almost oppressive. I couldn't see anything outside, and I felt trapped inside, disconnected from the outside world. I tossed my bag into the corner and lay down on the bed. The mattress creaked under my weight, but at that point I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep, and as strange as the surroundings were, fatigue won me over quickly. I passed out almost immediately, barely registering the discomfort of the hard bed or the weird smell of the room. What I didn't know at that moment was that in the hours to come, I would wish I had never stopped at that motel. I don't know how long I slept, but it was that kind of heavy sleep, the one where you wake up disoriented. It was the middle of the night, and the first thing I noticed was the absolute silence. Not normal silence, but that suffocating kind, where even the sound of the wind seems non-existent. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to remember where I was, when I started hearing a noise coming from the room next door. At first, it was low, almost imperceptible. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, that type of noise you hear in the middle of the night and try to ignore. It sounded like murmuring, a low voice, muffled by the wall. I couldn't make out what was being said, but the tone sent chills down my spine. I tried to brush it off, convinced it was just some guest coming in late, maybe talking on the phone. I rolled over and closed my eyes, but then the second sound came. A dull thud, like something heavy had been dropped on the floor. I sat up in bed, more alert this time. That sound wasn't normal. It was the kind of thing that makes you instinctively pay attention. And then it happened again. Something was being dragged like a piece of furniture, but the sound was softer, like something being dragged across the carpet. And it repeated over and over. I turned toward the wall, pressing my ear against it, and holding my breath to hear better. That's when I knew something was very wrong. On the other side of the wall, I could hear groans. They weren't loud, but the sound was disturbing, almost like someone was trying to stifle their pain, trying not to scream. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to convince myself it was just a couple having a fight, or I don't know, something that wasn't my business. But then, in the middle of the groans, came a sound that made my stomach turn. A wet sound like something being cut. The blade of a knife cutting through flesh, slow and deliberate. It was so clear that I could almost smell blood in the air. My heart started racing, adrenaline kicking in, but I couldn't move. Every fiber of my body was telling me to do something, anything. Run, call the police, bang on the door next door. But I was frozen, like I was trapped in that moment, unable to act. Just listening. The sound went on for a while, alternating between those muffled groans and that horrible sound of flesh being cut. I felt my chest tighten. It was too much for me. But instead of acting, all I could do was back away from the wall and lie back down on the bed, my heart pounding, my body shaking. I covered myself, like that old, worn-out blanket could protect me from whatever was happening next door. The noise persisted for a few more minutes, maybe longer. I don't really know. I was so terrified that time seemed to have stopped. And then, suddenly, silence. The same deadly silence as before, but this time it felt heavier, more oppressive. It was like the room next door was empty, like no one had ever been there. But I knew what I had heard. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe I was just hallucinating from exhaustion, but none of it made sense. What I had heard was too real. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, motionless, staring at the ceiling, waiting for any other sound, any other sign of life. But all that came was silence. At that moment, I knew something was deeply wrong with this place. And all I wanted was for the sun to rise, so I could get out of there. With the daylight finally streaming through the window, I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. I headed to the bathroom, washed my face, and tried to calm myself. But the sounds I heard in the room next door were still fresh in my mind. It felt like terror had settled inside me. I needed to get out of there, but before I did, I had to figure out what was really going on. I decided that before leaving, I needed to know more about that room. My instinct for curiosity told me there was something more there, something I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my bag and went down to the reception. The receptionist was there, wearing a bored and indifferent expression, as if she had no idea what I had been through. I approached her, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the room next door? Are you sure it's empty? What happened to it?" I asked, trying to sound as calm as possible. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. "I don't think we have enough guests to fill all the rooms. What you heard was probably from somewhere else. Sometimes the pipes make noise. What matters is that you're safe here," she replied, shrugging. Frustration washed over me, but I didn't want to stir up more trouble. It was clear she wasn't going to help. I left the reception and headed toward the back door. I needed to check if there was any entry or window in the room next door. The outside area was dark and poorly lit, which only increased my sense of discomfort. The motel was surrounded by dense vegetation and trees that seemed to have a life of their own, slowly moving with the wind. I approached the wall dividing the rooms. With silence prevailing, I could hear the sound of leaves rustling and a distant bird call. I was about to give up, but then I noticed something strange on the ground. What looked like a dark stain right under the window of the room next door. I got closer and recognized the color. It was blood. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't believe I had found this. I looked around, afraid someone might be watching me. I decided it was time to leave, but before I could take 2 steps, I heard a noise coming from inside the room next door. A door creaking, as if someone had just stepped out. Panic set in. What would I do if I found someone there? I wasn't prepared to face the situation. My heart raced, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. What was happening in that unit? What had happened to whoever had been there before me? Suddenly, the door swung open. A woman appeared. Her hair was disheveled, her skin pale, and her eyes wide. She looked at me with an expression of shock and fear, as if I were a ghost. I braced myself to run, but something in her expression made me hesitate. She looked as lost as I felt. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have the courage to answer. I just stared at her. "They won't let me go. We can't stay here," she continued, desperate. Before I could do anything, she looked over my shoulder and began to back away, as if she were seeing something terrifying. "They're coming back," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. A sense of urgency took over me. "Who's coming back?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She simply turned and ran back into the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do. If that woman was right and something was really happening, I had no more time. I needed to get out. I looked around, searching for a quick escape. I decided I couldn't waste any more time and ran back to the motel entrance. But what I found there made me stop abruptly. The receptionist now wore a strange smile on her face, and beside her stood a tall, skeletal man with a cold expression. My heart raced again. The feeling of being trapped in a nightmare was only intensifying. The motel was not just a place to pass through. It was a trap. I felt surrounded. The receptionist and that man were watching me as if they knew I had discovered something I shouldn't have. The skeletal man approached me, and his smile was more of a threat than anything else. "You seem a bit nervous," he said, his voice smooth but with a sinister tone. "You shouldn't worry. Here, everyone is welcome." I didn't know whether to run or stay calm. The walls of the motel seemed to close in around me, and I didn't want to find out what really happened there. I tried to sidestep, but the man blocked my way, his eyes shining with an unusual intensity. "Why were you interested in the room next door?" he asked, his expression quickly shifting from friendly to menacing. "That room isn't for the curious." Adrenaline coursed through my veins. "I just wanted to know who was there," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard strange noises during the night." He laughed, a low and mocking sound. "Noises? Here, what you hear is irrelevant. What matters is that you stay where you are. We have a commitment to fulfill." His words echoed in my mind, as if they were a warning. The receptionist began to laugh, a low and disturbing laugh. "You're not getting out that easily. You're here now, and it's not safe to leave. The road is not what it seems. Not for you." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" I wanted to scream, but my voice failed me. I just wanted to be far away from that place. At that moment, the door to the room next door swung open again, and the woman appeared, her expression now one of absolute despair. "You need to go. They're coming." She was nearly in a panic. Before I could ask what she meant, the two began to move toward her, as if they were predators. I didn't think twice. I turned on my heels and ran for the exit. My heart was in my throat, and the sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The main door was just a few steps away, but I knew the man was right behind me. I hit the door and pushed it with all the strength I had. The fresh air hit me, but the noise behind me grew louder. The man was closer than I would have liked. When I passed through the door, I heard the receptionist screaming, "Don't let him out." I ran across the parking lot toward my car, which seemed an eternity away. I felt a presence behind me, but I dared not look. Finally, I reached the car, pulled the keys from my pocket, and locked the doors as I climbed inside. My hands trembling, I put the key in the ignition and started the engine. The noise of the car was a symphony of safety, but the feeling of terror still lingered in the air. I pressed down on the accelerator and left the parking lot without looking back. The motel quickly vanished from my view, but the woman's words still echoed in my mind. "They're coming?" The road ahead was deserted, and the sun began to rise, bathing everything in a strange and almost unreal light. What exactly had happened there? With every turn, every shadow appearing on the side of the road, I wondered if I was really safe. The motel and its strange guests wouldn't let me go that easily. As I drove, the adrenaline began to dissipate, giving way to a deep fatigue. I needed to stop somewhere safe, but the memories of the sounds, the woman, and that man still haunted me. I was forced to stop at a gas station, hoping the movement around me would make me feel less vulnerable. While filling up my car, I noticed a group of people in the convenience store. They were chatting animatedly, but when they saw me, the conversation stopped. Their gaze was one of recognition, as if they knew exactly what I had been through. One of the men approached me, his look full of empathy. "You came from the motel on the road, didn't you?" he asked, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You shouldn't have stayed there. They don't let guests leave that easily." "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me gravely, as if he were about to share a dangerous secret. "Everyone knows. Those who leave are never the same." Some disappear. Others, well, you saw the woman, right? They keep her there for some reason. My thoughts raced. What exactly was happening? I looked around, and now every glance I received felt more suspicious. I need to go, I said, turning back to the car. The man hesitated, as if he wanted to stop me. If you have a chance, go back and help those who stayed. You might be their only hope, he warned me, but I couldn't. The fear and paralysis from the motel were still fresh in my mind. I jumped in the car, slammed the door, and accelerated. The road ahead was a mix of trees and shadows, and every shadow seemed to hide something. Even though I had managed to escape the motel, I didn't know if I was truly free. The feeling that something was still following me lingered, and with each mile, the tension increased. And as I drove, a disturbing sensation engulfed me. Something told me the story wasn't over. The motel, the woman, the man, they all left a mark on me that I wouldn't be able to forget. I work as a night security guard in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. This place, if you can even call it a motel, is one of those rundown establishments with peeling walls and flickering lights. The clientele is strange. People who don't care to introduce themselves or who request a room for just a few hours. But most of the time, I don't have much to worry about. However, there's one room that sends chills down my spine since I started working here. Room 13. No one uses it. The door is always locked, or at least it should be. On that particular night, the silence was profound. The only thing breaking the calm was the sound of the clock on the wall in the office, ticking away time amidst the solitude. It was around 2 in the morning, and I had just checked some of the other rooms, making sure everything was in order. When I got close to room 13, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. My stomach turned. This didn't make sense because I had just checked all the doors minutes earlier. With a cold knot in my gut, I approached. What was happening? With a gentle push, the door opened a bit more, revealing the darkness inside. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The corridor light barely illuminated the space. I stepped inside. The room looked just like all the others. A disheveled bed, a table with a turned-off lamp, and a bathroom at the back. However, something felt different. The temperature was drastically colder, as if I had crossed a barrier between two worlds. The discomfort grew, and I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end. I made my way to the bathroom, driven by curiosity and the need to understand what was happening. As soon as I entered, I glanced at the mirror and nearly fell back. I swear I saw a figure standing there, motionless, watching me. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something more. The figure appeared to be a woman, but her features were indistinct, as if the image was blurred. I couldn't see her face clearly, and a chilling wave coursed through my body. I was paralyzed, staring at that thing. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. And in an instant, the figure vanished, as if it had never been there. What was that? I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the feeling that something was wrong remained heavy in the air. With a sudden impulse, I bolted from the bathroom and slammed the door shut, locking it. I returned to the office, trying to ignore what had just happened. My mind was in turmoil. That vision wasn't normal, and the sense that something malevolent was hiding there wouldn't leave me in peace. I tried to focus on my work, but the image of that figure lingered in my thoughts. I knew something much darker was at play, and room 13 was at the center of it all. As I looked at the security camera monitor, I saw nothing. The footage was normal, with no sign of the figure I had seen, and that only heightened my unease. It was as if room 13 was a kind of portal to something I couldn't comprehend. Since that night, one idea kept haunting me. That room was not just an empty space. It was a place laden with stories, secrets, and a presence unwilling to be ignored. I couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, she was still there, waiting. I sat in my office chair, staring intently at the screen of the camera showing the door of room 13. What was I doing there? It was just a motel, and I was just a night security guard, but the sense that something was off consumed me. Hours passed, and though the place remained calm, I couldn't relax. Each time I glanced at the monitor, I felt a weight in my chest. I decided to leave the office and do another round. As I walked past the other rooms, the atmosphere felt familiar. The musty smell and dim lighting were almost comforting, but when I reached room 13, my body tensed. The door was still ajar, as if it were calling to me. I went over again, even knowing I shouldn't. This time, the door opened a bit more at my touch, revealing the darkness inside. The air was even colder. I entered, and everything was just as I had left it. But something felt different. It was as if the room was watching me, almost like a living being. The bathroom was still there, and the image of the mirror haunted me. The urge to approach, it was almost irresistible. I stepped closer hesitantly. The reflection of the room behind me appeared normal. But as I looked closer, I saw something moving. It was a shadow that wasn't reflected in the light. It was as if something was hiding, waiting to be discovered. I screamed. I had no idea what sound had escaped my mouth, but I couldn't control myself. I ran out of the room, but the door slammed behind me with a crash that reverberated through the corridor. Adrenaline surged through my body. What was in there? What was following me? I went straight back to the office, but this time I couldn't sit still. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking. I decided to check the cameras for anything that might explain what was happening. Every minute felt like an eternity as I reviewed the footage. Room 13 was empty, but the feeling that something had shifted there was palpable. As the night wore on, every noise grew louder. The lights in the room flickered, and a strange wind seemed to sweep through the hallway, even though no windows were open. Then, I heard a noise, a whisper coming from room 13. It was as if someone were calling my name. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity won out once more. I headed over there cautious. As the night wore on, every noise grew louder. The lights in the room flickered, and a strange wind seemed to sweep through the hallway, even though no windows were open. Then, I heard a noise, a whisper coming from room 13. It was as if someone were calling my name. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity won out once more. I headed over there cautious. The door was open again. The image of the figure tormented me, but there was an irresistible need to understand. I approached, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I entered, and the room was just as I had left it, but the air was heavy, almost oppressive. The bathroom was silent, but a part of me felt that something was about to happen. The mirror reflected a distorted image, and as I drew nearer, I saw an expression of despair. It was as if the figure had appeared again, but this time it wasn't just a vision. The mirror began to fog up, and then words appeared. "Help me." My stomach twisted. I tried to back away, but my legs felt glued to the ground. The voice was clear now, a mix of pain and pleading. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks, but the feeling that the figure was trapped there, waiting for help, intensified. When I finally managed to move, I bolted from the room and slammed the door so hard that the wall vibrated. I locked it with the key, my heart racing wildly. What was I supposed to do? I tried to dismiss the scene, but the echo of that voice still resonated in my mind. I knew there was something deeper in that place, something beyond from what my eyes could see. That night, the image of room 13 became an obsession. I couldn't escape the idea that something terrible had happened there, something that needed to be revealed. When my shift ended, I left the motel without looking back, but the feeling that the door to room 13 was slightly ajar, waiting for someone to enter, never left my mind. Whatever was there hadn't finished with me, and I knew that, somehow, it was just beginning. The next day, I barely managed to sleep. The images of room 13 and the pleading voice were still fresh in my mind. What had happened there? The motel seemed to have a different atmosphere, as if everyone knew what was going on but no one spoke about it. The manager, always with his empty smile, didn't look me in the eyes as he usually did. There was something unsettling about that morning. I decided I needed answers. I went to the break room and sat next to some of the other staff. I casually brought up room 13, but I noticed everyone tensed up immediately. Their expressions changed and their voices dropped. "Don't talk about it," whispered a cleaning lady, fear written all over her face. "Why not?" I asked, intrigued. The woman hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. "Because you don't know what happened there. No one should go into that room." It's better to leave it alone. This only heightened my curiosity. What could be so terrible that everyone avoided talking about it? The manager hadn't told me everything. If someone had died in there, what else could have happened? Instead of sitting there, I decided I needed to investigate on my own. At the end of my shift, night fell, and the motel filled up with strangers again. I tried to keep my mind busy, but the thought of facing room 13 was irresistible. When the clock struck midnight, I was determined. I grabbed the key and headed down the hallway. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. When I arrived, the door was ajar again. I took a deep breath, trying not to let fear take over. I cautiously pushed the door, expecting the cold air to envelop me once more. I entered, and the feeling was instantaneous. The air was thick, as if something were pressing against my chest. The room looked the same, but there was a strange vibration, as if it were waiting for me. I looked at the bathroom mirror, my heart racing. What was I hoping to see? The figure? The voice? This time, there was no image, but the fogging began to appear again, and the same phrase emerged. Help me. The desperation in the voice felt real, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I tried to speak. How can I help you? But the words wouldn't come. Instead, the temperature dropped even more, and I felt a shiver run through my body. Then, the light began to flicker. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the figure appeared again, but this time she was clearer. It was a woman with an anguished look, as if she were trapped in an invisible prison. The image was agonizing. I couldn't move, as if I were trapped too. The woman reached out her hand towards me, and in that moment, everything made sense. The story the manager told, the whispers, the feeling of something more in the room, it all fit together. I didn't just see a figure. I felt her. She was begging for help. But why? What had happened in that place that kept her trapped? Then, with a snap, the image vanished, and I was left alone in the room, the voice echoing in my mind. It was time to uncover the truth. What happened to her? What did she want from me? With that, the idea that I might be the only one capable of helping her consumed me. I left room 13, determined to seek answers. Whatever was happening there, I needed to understand. It wasn't just about the room. It was about the story trapped there, and I couldn't leave it open-ended. I returned to the office, intending to investigate the motel's past and maybe find information about the woman who had asked for my help. If I could free her from the torment in which she was trapped. And so, the search for the truth began. In the days that followed, I threw myself into research. I knew I couldn't ignore the motel's past any longer. I asked some staff members, but everyone avoided the topic. The manager was always nearby, watching as if he wanted me to give up. But I wasn't going to quit. Something inside me told me I had to push forward. During my free time, I started searching for information online. I found out that the motel had a long history of troubled guests, but nothing that explained the figure I saw in room 13. That's when, by chance, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article. It talked about a woman named Sarah who had stayed at the motel 5 years ago. What really caught my attention was how she had died. Sarah was a young woman with mental health issues, and the motel was one of the few places that accepted her. The article reported that after a fight with her boyfriend, she had fallen into a deep depression. Nobody really knew what happened that fateful night, but guests heard screams and cries. The next morning, her body was found in the bathroom of room 13. The circumstances were mysterious. There was no clear explanation, only rumors and despair. I couldn't stop reading. Her story was unfolding before my eyes. It was the same woman I saw in the mirror. The desperation in her eyes was real, and now I knew she was trapped there, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. This was more than I had expected. With this new information, I decided it was time to confront the manager. I wanted to know more about Sarah and what really happened that night. However, as soon as I began to ask questions, I realized he was unwilling to cooperate. He tried to change the subject and even told me to leave. But determination drove me. I went back to the motel later that night. I was set on confronting that spirit, discovering what really happened in room 13. As soon as I arrived, I felt a pressure in the air, as if the environment was charged with electricity. The door to room 13 was ajar again, but this time, There was a difference. A dim light pulsed from within. I hesitated, but something pushed me forward. I entered, and the room was just as it had been before, but with a new feeling. The atmosphere was tense, as if charged with emotion. And there she was, Sarah, clearer than before. Her image was no longer a shadow. It was almost real. "You came," she said, her voice echoing through the air. It was as if she had materialized before me. "I didn't want to be here, but I can't leave until someone knows what happened." "I know," I replied, feeling my heart race. "I read about you. What can I do to help?" "I need people to know the truth," she implored, pain etched on her face. No one believed me when I said I didn't want to die. I just wanted love, but everything turned so dark. In that moment, I realized that she wasn't just trapped by the past, but by unresolved pain. The people who passed through the motel, without understanding her story, had contributed to her imprisonment. For her to be free, I needed to tell the truth. "I will do it, Sarah. I will tell your story," I promised. She smiled, a sad but hopeful smile. And, at that instant, the pressure in the air began to dissipate. The light around her seemed to shine brighter. "Thank you," she whispered before vanishing, leaving only a sense of relief in the air. I left room 13, feeling that something had changed. The motel seemed lighter, and the sense of oppression had vanished. I knew I had a mission now. I returned to the office and began typing, writing about everything I discovered about Sarah, her pain, and what really happened in that room. After a few weeks, I managed to publish an article on a local website, sharing her story and giving voice to something that had been silenced. The response was immediate. People began to talk about the motel and what had happened there. Comments and accounts started to appear, and soon the news spread. Room 13 was never the same again. It was as if the atmosphere had completely changed. The heavy energy surrounding it disappeared, and the door was finally locked, now with a sign that read, "Reserved for memories." I knew Sarah had found peace. The motel still had its strange guests, but now there was a story to tell, one that I wouldn't let be forgotten. After all, the truth needs to be known, and sometimes we need to listen to those who can no longer speak. And so, with the story told, I left the motel knowing I had done the right thing. Life moved on, but whenever I passed by that place, I felt a lightness in the air, as if finally Sarah's soul could rest. My girlfriend and I were on a long trip, the road stretching out before us like an endless invitation to the unknown. The plan was simple: stop at a roadside motel and rest before continuing. After a few hours of driving, we found a place that seemed reasonable. It was a typical cheap motel, with that air of weariness that only time and neglect can bring. The neon lights flickered, almost like a beacon for lost travelers. When we entered the reception area, the woman behind the desk looked at us with a smile that was more uncomfortable than welcoming. She had an expression I couldn't quite place. Was it sympathy or just curiosity? She handed us the room key, which had a number engraved on a metal tag, and wished us a good stay. The sound of the bell next to her seemed to echo in my ears as we left the reception, as if the very structure was saying goodbye to us. As soon as we entered the room, the first thing I noticed was the smell of cleanliness mixed with a slight hint of mold. The room was small but reasonably tidy. There was a double bed in one corner, an old TV on the shelf, and a bathroom with somewhat worn tiles. Everything seemed okay. It wasn't the Ritz, but it was enough for a night's rest. After a hot shower, we both felt a bit more relaxed. We decided to watch a movie on TV as night fell. The light from the screen illuminated the room, creating a contrast with the darkness gathering outside. Everything seemed normal, like any other night on a trip. We laughed, talked, and made plans for what we would do the next day. The atmosphere was light, but there was something in the air that I couldn't quite identify. It was my girlfriend who, unknowingly, broke the normalcy. While we were watching the movie, she got up to grab some popcorn, and, when she returned, she had a confused expression on her face. "Hey, look at this," she said, pointing to the wall opposite the bed. I followed her gaze and saw a small crack in the wall. It was almost imperceptible, but what really caught my attention was the subtle glow coming from within that opening. I went over to investigate, And as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a crack. There was a lens, a camera. My heart raced and a cold chill ran down my spine. "This isn't good," I muttered, trying to stay calm as reality began to settle in my mind. We were hit by the same wave of distrust. Who was watching us? What else could be hidden in that place? We decided that we couldn't stay there. The place had transformed from a simple motel into a trap. "Let's get out of here," I said, already heading for the door. What followed was a moment I will never forget. Before we could reach the exit, the sound of the lock began to turn. Someone was trying to open the door from the outside. Panic overtook me. We both recoiled, unsure of what to do, as fear settled in our stomachs. What was outside? Why would someone be trying to enter our room? Then we heard the voice. It was muffled, as if someone was speaking through a closed door. "You shouldn't have touched the camera." The phrase sounded strange, as if the person on the other side was just annoyed, but the cold in my belly told me something was very wrong. The voice had a tone that made me want to run, but we were frozen. At that moment, silence fell. The noise of the lock stopped, and the atmosphere around us grew tense. Fear wrapped around us like a fog, and I looked at my girlfriend, who was also in shock. Questions began to pile up in my mind. What did that mean? Who was watching us? The pressure in the room mounted. We locked the door chain, as if that would be real protection against the unknown. My brain was racing, and the feeling that we were in a no-exit situation was almost suffocating. I decided we would need help, so I grabbed my phone, and when I looked at the screen, I realized I had no signal. My heart sank. There was no way to call the police, and the idea that we were completely isolated only worsened the situation. I glanced out the window, hoping to see our car and any sign of life in the parking lot. But everything was deserted. It was as if the motel had been abandoned at night, and we were the only prisoners of a soulless place. The moonlight illuminated the empty parking lot, and the solitude of that scene made me even more anxious. What was happening? Where were the other people who should have been there? We spent the rest of the night in silence, the hours dragging on as if time had stopped. Every creak, every strange sound put me on edge. The clock on the wall seemed louder with every second, and the darkness around us seemed to close in, filling every corner with an oppressive feeling. The only comfort we had was each other's presence, but even so, the tension was palpable. Finally, the light of morning began to break, and the feeling of relief started to mix with distrust. The previous night felt like a nightmare, but the sun was rising, and maybe it had all just been an illusion. Looking at the bed, at the room that now seemed more familiar, there was still a shadow of uncertainty hanging over us. In that moment, feeling the fresh morning breeze coming in through the window, we decided it was time to leave. Whatever had happened there, we couldn't ignore it. Freedom was just a few steps away, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. As we got up to leave, one question kept echoing in our minds. What really happened that night? And who was watching us through that camera? The answers remained in the shadows, and what we thought was a simple stop at a roadside motel was turning into a nightmare that had not yet ended. That morning felt more like a trick of the mind. As we stepped out of the room, the feeling of relief mixed with a slight sense of anguish. The motel corridor was silent and deserted, as if no one had passed through there in days. The linoleum floor creaked beneath our feet, and every step seemed to echo as a reminder of what had happened. When we finally reached the reception area, the same woman who had greeted us upon arrival was still there. Her smile was on her face, but her eyes seemed empty, as if she wasn't really there. "Good morning. How was your stay?" Her question, so casual, made me uneasy. How could she ask that after what we had experienced? "We need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head as if she was waiting for an explanation, but her expression didn't change. My girlfriend began to tell her about the camera in the wall and the voice we heard. The woman simply looked at us, with no reaction. The silence between us was suffocating. After a few seconds, the woman gave a slight smile and said, "Oh, those cameras are old. Just for security, you know? Don't worry, there's nothing to fear." Her words didn't sound reassuring. It felt like we were talking to someone who already knew well the terror that had happened there. We decided we couldn't stay another minute. As we made our way to the door, I glanced back and saw the woman watching us, still with that strange smile on her face. I didn't know what to expect. The motel felt like a maze, and the feeling that we were being followed never left me. As soon as we reached our car, reality began to set in. We were safe, but the memories of that night haunted us. I looked at my girlfriend, and she seemed just as confused as I was. "We should leave now," I said without thinking twice. But when I started the car, something made me hesitate. In the rearview mirror, the motel's light looked darker, as if a shadow was creeping closer. "Did you see that?" I asked, but my girlfriend just shook her head. The car wouldn't move, and the engine seemed to refuse to work. As we tried to figure out what was happening, an intense chill began to invade the car. The motel door slowly opened, and I saw the figure of the woman standing there. She was at the entrance, as if she was watching us with a disturbing intensity. My heart raced. "What does she want? Let's get out of here," I shouted, and finally managed to start the car. We sped off, dust rising from the ground as we accelerated. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the woman still there, motionless, watching our car drive away. The road stretched out before us, but the feeling that something had changed followed us. What else was there in that motel? What else was hidden there? We had no answers, but we knew something was watching us, and the memories of that night were about to haunt us for a long time.